The warmth left the valley. Not gradually, it fled, as if every molecule of heat across the sulfur-choked basin had received the same information and decided to be elsewhere. Kindled General Ashev stood among 50,000 Pyrrolith soldiers, his chest crystal vibrating as the ambient temperature plummeted. He raised a hand, halting the vanguard. Something was walking toward them through the ash. The brittle petals of a dried flower had been his only concern 3 hours ago. It was a fragile, papery thing, pressed meticulously between the pages of a captured human technical manual. Beneath the cracked crust of the contested zone, magma veins pulsed with a familiar, radiant comfort. This was a Pyrrolith world now. The invasion forces had claimed the sulfur-choked valleys with terrifying efficiency, turning the environment itself into a weapon against the fragile mammalian defenders. Kindled General Ash walked through the metallic corridors of the abandoned human forward base, his heavy footsteps echoing in the empty command center. His core flame flickered with an old instability, casting erratic blue shadows across his translucent chest crystal. They had secured the entire sector without a single casualty, sweeping through the modular rooms and finding nothing but discarded equipment and the lingering scent of ozone that suggested a panicked retreat. Yet, sitting on the main console, a single technical manual remained entirely untouched. Ashfav had opened the heavy book to find a dried flower pressed carefully between the schematics. It was an organic anomaly, a piece of dead flora carried across light years of hostile space. Why preserve such a useless thing in a war zone? A low hiss of escaping sulfur marked the arrival of his scout commander. The subordinate bowed, flames dipping low. "General, we have a contact on the southern ridge." A single human. Ashfav turned, the manual still resting in his massive, heated palm. "A mechanized transport?" "No, sir. On foot. Alone." Amusement rippled through the Pyrrolith ranks as the orders were relayed. Ashfav instructed the army to hold their ground. They gathered on the obsidian plains, 50,000 warriors burning bright against the ash-dark sky. The heat they generated was enough to melt the boots of any standard infantry. Ashev stood at the vanguard, his internal fire stabilizing into a confident, brilliant orange. He wanted to see this foolish creature. He wanted to watch the punishing environment consume the mammalian soldier before his own vanguard even had to raise their plasma rifles. The medical officer tapped a crystalline datapad, projecting a holographic scan of the approaching figure. The biological readout was catastrophic. The human skeletal structure showed multiple microfractures, and their circulatory system was actively leaking fluid from several lacerations. By any logical physiological standard, the mammal should have been comatose, yet its endocrine system was flooding its neural pathways with a chemical compound called adrenaline. This primitive evolutionary mechanism was forcibly overriding the body's pain receptors, weaponizing the creature's own fatal injuries to sustain kinetic momentum. It was turning absolute physiological failure into fuel for impossible forward motion, which meant the initial casualty projections were entirely wrong, baffling the entire command staff. The thermal scanner officer stepped forward, his own fiery visage dimming in absolute confusion. "General, the human is generating heat." Ashvet let out a crackling sound akin to laughter. "Of course, they are warm-blooded mammals." "No, sir," the officer replied, tapping the thermal display frantically. "They are generating more heat. With every step, they are getting hotter." Ashby's flame flickered with that old instability again, a sharp spike of blue deep within his chest crystal. "What would it take for your body to become a furnace of pure defiance?" The ash crunched rhythmically under heavy, dragging boots. The solitary figure pulled its left leg slightly, leaving a smeared dark trail across the cracked obsidian plains. Ashev watched the tactical feed mirror the unbelievable visual reality unfolding before him. Blood stained the human's torn fatigue jacket, boiling almost instantly in the planet's punishing ambient heat. 50,000 Pyrrolith warriors stood shoulder to shoulder across the ridge, forming a literal wall of living magma. Yet not a single plasma rifle was raised in the vanguard. The entire invasion force was completely mesmerized by the sheer impossibility of the sight moving through the choking sulfur mist. The thermal officers were entirely silent now. The datapad readouts were practically blinding the command staff. This single, broken mammal was outshining the active volcanic vents roaring beneath their very feet. The human was burning from the inside out, consuming its own cellular structure to maintain an impossible forward momentum. Ashev felt a strange, discordant vibration rattling through his crystalline skeleton. It was a sensation he had never processed in 3 centuries of brutal conquest. His elite soldiers were actually stepping back. Beings born of stellar cores and planetary mantle were instinctively retreating from a creature constructed of salt water and fragile, snapping bone. They were terrified of the heat. The vanguard shifted just enough to let the sudden chill settle over the front lines. And then the warmth fled the valley entirely, sucked into the gravitational pull of the human's sheer localized will. Ashev stepped forward, his massive, heated frame towering over the approaching soldier. The human finally stopped walking. Their breathing was a ragged, wet sound echoing in the strangely quiet basin. The mammal's eyes lifted slowly, locking directly onto the kindled general's burning, translucent core. Ashev projected his voice through the atmospheric translators, the sound rumbling over the rocks like a tectonic shift. He offered them the only logical choice left in the universe. He told them to surrender. The humans swayed, bleeding freely onto the superheated rock. They did not raise a weapon or signal a strike. They simply looked at the towering wall of living fire, took a shallow breath that rattled violently in their ruined chest, and spoke. No, one word. It lacked the booming, seismic resonance of the Purolith tongue. It was completely quiet. It was utterly final. The humans shifted their failing weight and stepped forward again, moving directly toward the center of the hostile formation. Ashfed did not issue the order to fire. His tactical mind fractured, searching desperately for the critical variable his entire species had missed. Then the memory of the abandoned command center surfaced with absolute clarity. The heavy technical manual, the dried, brittle flower petals pressed carefully between pages of cold data. It had not been discarded trash. It had been a vital tether, carried across hostile light years, preserved through orbital bombardments, touched every single day by a hand that refused to let go. The creature walking toward his army was not running on chemical adrenaline alone. They were carrying the heavy memory of everything they loved right into the dark. Deep within the general's crystalline chest, his core flame shifted. It flickered, dimmed rapidly, and turned entirely to a pale, ghostly blue. For the first time in his long, burning existence, the fire being felt cold. The ranks of living magma parted silently, and the human walked right through. What happens when an unstoppable force finally reaches its destination? We will see tomorrow.